This is episode 7 of Innovating Education, featuring Clarissa Isabelle Delgado, founder of Teach for the Philippines. Clarissa Delgado is because they are. She's the sum of so many extraordinary stories that entangle her beliefs and her choices. You will see in this conversation, I hope, the contagious passion, love, energy, charismatic vision that Clarissa has. As she would say, she's the sum of their stories, the stories of revolutionary leaders from the Philippines, that goes from the great-grandparents to her grandparents to her mother, and that desire that is hers of continuing to transform, continuing to better, continuing to impact positively her country and the world through love. Because as she says, teaching and education is and must always be an act of love.
It's been too long since I got any sleep. Yeah, it's been a while.
Clarissa Isabelle Delgado is the co-founder and CEO of Teach for the Philippines. Teach for the Philippines focuses its efforts on improving teacher quality and addressing education challenges at the system level. Clarissa is a member of the inaugural class of Obama Foundation Fellows of 2018. Follow Teach for the Philippines on Facebook at Teach for the Philippines and on Instagram and Twitter at Teach for the PH. Find out more and support the organization by visiting their website teachforthephilippines.com. Welcome. Good morning, Clarissa. So happy to have you here. So happy to be able to listen to your story and listen to your inspiring journey. So many things to talk about. I'm actually so excited for this conversation. So this morning, this is going to be your home. We welcome you. We're happy to have you. And I'm sure our audience will really enjoy this conversation.
Thank you so much for having me, Stephen.
Clarissa, looking at your story and preparing this interview, many themes came to mind, and we have this conversation and we exchange email about it, and we say, okay, let's go around different themes. And the first theme that came to me was kind of the Ubuntu philosophy that you also have in the Philippines, in your culture. And if I say to you, I am because we are, you are because they are, how does that resonate to you and your story?
Very much so. I normally, it's funny you mention Ubuntu and your culture and how you say it. I think the way I've gotten used to saying it here is I am who we are, right? And even though maybe there's no particular Filipino idiom or expression to illustrate that, certainly our culture is all about that. And when I speak specifically of I am who we are, I think of the various women in my life who have and whose life stories have shaped me irreversibly. And in particular, I think of my grandmother on my mom's side. I think of my mother. I think of my mom's best friend, who's my mentor. And also the strong men. I think of my dad's father, for example. and their life stories and experiences that have very much not only influenced our dinner table conversations, but also shaped the person that I am today. So I really am who my family is.
It's our responsibility to really make it a determination every day to make a difference. It doesn't matter if we do not see the whole picture, but just to make a difference and not be part of the problem. Sobonfo Some. Let's go into that journey. Let's go back for the audience to understand who you are. Let's go back in that journey because you have such an amazing history of special connection with education, with learning, so that goes from your grandmother to your mom to your grandfather. Can you tell us more about that story of yours?
Sure.
Of these women.
Of these women, and of course also the strong men. It's funny. I think the Delgado family has been in the Philippines a long time, and it's neither more special or less special than anybody else. It's just that we've made a home here since the 1500s, and so my family has been intimately involved with I guess the various life stages of our country. And it is through that lens, right? I mean, it's obviously been experienced by every person that lives here or their families, but we speak about it a lot at home, and so always grew up around the table through their lenses and all the things that they've done to work hard for the communities around them. And I think that, again, as I mentioned just a few minutes ago, that has absolutely informed who I am today, just the personal narrative of knowing where I come from, right? And so my granduncle my great grandfather and granduncle, and these are on two different sides, one came from a northern region called Bulacan, my mom's family, and on my dad's side they've pretty much always been around Manila and the surrounding areas. And so in indigenous culture, we're lowlanders. We're part of the larger Tagalog tribe, in the lowland central region of the Philippines, or central region of Luzon Island rather, and I've had both sides of the family were involved in the first revolutions against Spain. Obviously, those histories are a little bit more sensitive to discuss because it was not exactly a beautiful memories for the family to pass down when you're considered revolutionaries, right? And you're either financing, on my dad's side, financing the revolution, or on my grandmother's side, actively participating in it. And it was a very dangerous time. They on my grandmother's side, we actually used to have the revolutionary uniform from 1898 of her relations, of what they used to wear, and these would encompass secret late night blood compacts and writing revolutionary magazines and just in general fighting for our independence. I think for closer history, for nearer history to me, my grandmother, both sets of grandparents were involved in World War II, albeit in different ways. So on my dad's side, my grandfather was an intelligence officer. And we have many stories there, obviously sensitive, and I just want to be sensitive to the other folks involved because it's not just my family. But anyways, he was caught by the Japanese and was a prisoner of war. And luckily, his mother and his sisters, my aunts, my grandaunts, I suppose, were able to get him out, and they had warned him, the Japanese soldier. It's funny how education plays into this, because it turned out that the commanding officer of his war camp was actually a Japanese student in his school. And the reason he was nice to my grandfather was because my grandfather was the only student that helped him learn English. So the Japanese had been in the Philippines for many years before World War II. And they had singled out this relationship, and then many years later, when the war obviously came to the shores of the Philippines, it turned out that this student that my grandfather had patiently taught English to was the commanding officer of Fort Santiago, where my grandfather was a prisoner of war. And so he got out and was very clearly told by his friend that this was a get out of jail free card once. And this whole story of even why I'm able to talk to you today is because in the intelligence circles there were a triad, so it was three, and they only knew the other two members. And the story that goes down in our family is that my grandfather was recovering. His back had been broken. He had, he was at that point, I think, 80 pounds so he was recovering from his stint. Yeah, it was horrible. We have some pictures from that time, or just one picture. I think they destroyed all the others. And so he was busy recovering for this, and it was a few months later, and my grandfather received a phone call at home, and it was the sister of one of the group of three. And she says, I just need to let you know that so and so has gotten picked up. And I don't know anything more than that, but I was always told that if he was picked up, that to call this number. I don't even know who you are. And my grandfather and grandmother, within 10 minutes, were out of the house. And they never found his other two members. And so the reason I'm able to sit here today is because of the way these stories are interwoven. We later met that sister. She became a nun, and we actually later met her, which was I think it really nearly knocked the wind out of my dad, because this story is something, obviously, it's so delicate. Life is so fragile, and if it wasn't for a randomized series of events, I wouldn't be here. On my grandmother's side, so my maternal grandmother's side, both of my grandparents were guerrilla fighters. They were in the middle of their studies to become doctors, from two completely different backgrounds. My maternal grandfather came from a wealthy family in the city, but he fell in love with my grandmother, who was the daughter of farmers, and then was proceeded to get disowned by his family. But both had a passion to be doctors. And their studies were interrupted, so I guess that places them at 19, 20, going to the best university in the Philippines for medicine. The war comes, the city's completely, first it's taken over, then life is kind of in this limbo. It's kind of the coronavirus but on steroids with violence. Everybody's quarantined, so to speak, by violence, and then of course it just continues to escalate. And I just always, sitting at the table and listening to how then my grandmother went to join the fight. I always used to think, when I was leaving for school, I was like, would I have enough courage? She must have been 19, 20. And she actually ended up becoming the guerrilla captain of her unit. She was the chief medic and guerrilla captain. And funnily enough, we don't learn these stories from my grandparents. We have to pry them from the other folks around them, because it was never pleasant memories for them to discuss. And I'm actually quite sensitive talking about it. I actually had to ask her permission to talk about it, because it's not things that they like to remember, but it makes up such an important piece, I think, of who we are. And I remember when I would talk to my mom about this, maybe it doesn't really make sense, or it's not something I can relate to at the time, but when I reflect on it, it helps me feel grounded, I guess, in who I am, and in building those roots through who I am. I'm able to build roots deeper into the country I come from, and who I want to be in this world, with certainty and clarity. Because of the vulnerability and the richness of the stories of lives lived well before me. And I think I'm lucky to have my grandmother still alive. Both of them are 100. One is 101 and one is 100.
What?
Yeah, they're still alive. And my grandmother just called me the other week. She was reading a story where I had mentioned this, and she was, I think she had forgotten that she'd given me permission. And so we were chatting about that. But in general, she was very pleased. Yeah. So I take those stories to heart, and I think, I mean, my mom's mom is somebody. When we were starting up the organization I continue to work for, and co-founded. I used to go to her, and believe it or not, for a glass of whiskey. She loved her whiskey, and she still does, in fact. And I'd come to her and I'd just say, this has been the worst day. I am having the worst day. This is the worst. And she's like, are you dying? And I would inevitably say, no, I'm not dying. It's just I'm having a really bad day, and the world is crashing down and it's coming to an end. And she's like, well, if you're not dying, it can't be that bad. So here's a whiskey and tell me about it. And I think, again, if you heard that and you weren't aware of her story, you'd be like, gosh, that's a little mean. But from my perspective, I was like, holy kamote, like, she at 19, 20, she's off fighting, literally risking her life every day. And so her complete perspective of what a difficult day is just radically different. Not to mention having 12 pregnancies, raising 8 children, working as a full-time doctor, and I think that humbles me. And again, like I said, just deepens my roots and who I am. There's nothing particularly special or remarkable or magnificent. I'm not idolizing or putting on a pedestal these stories, but knowing the stories helps me understand where I come from. And there is a saying in Filipino that says, yung hindi marunong, and basically in English, like, if you don't know where you come from, you won't know where you're going to go.
Can you say it in the language, in your language?
Yes, and it's ascribed to Jose Rizal. Yung hindi marunong lumingon sa pinanggagalingan, hindi makarating sa paroroonan. Meaning, they won't know where they're going to arrive. And I think maybe that's our version, to get back to your initial question. Maybe that's our way of being who we are, of one of an us, which is understanding where we come from, so we know where we're going.
My name is Sheng Magalino, a second-year fellow assigned to the La Paz Main Elementary School in Binyan, Laguna. I said yes to Teach for the Philippines because I saw hope in our kids, in our country, and it is always a privilege to serve others. And the organization just gave me an opportunity to give others opportunity to explore and to discover themselves more, and the whole school community more.
Thank you for sharing. I don't know if I told you. So on my grandma's side, she was actually, both my grandparents on my mother's side were from Cameroon. My mom is from Cameroon, and my grandma was. She actually was. Both of them were orphans because of the war, the previous war, and they started as farmers, right? So my grandfather used to go to school with no shoes and everything. And he started from nothing all the way to building the first hospital. And I grew up I am from a doctor's family, right? So in my family, it's like you become a doctor. Yes. And I know how it is to grow up in a doctor family, and somehow you have My uncles have been very successful and everything, and my mom is the only one actually who stayed in France. All my uncles, sorry, they went back to Cameroon. They came to Europe to study and they went back to Cameroon. My mom, she came to France when she was, I believe, 11 or 13 years old. And I've always been wondering about how it was for her to leave a country and find herself in this total different environment and everything. And I think we got this in common as well, because I know that your grandmother left, the one that is a doctor as well, left and went to the US at some point. And you left at a very young age and went to the US. And I was wondering, how was this challenge of leaving the Philippines at a very young age? How was it for you? And what have you heard also from your grandmother? But how was it for you?
So hard. So hard. My time in the United States, and I think, so I spent about a decade in the United States. I left the Philippines when I was 13. And I didn't come back to the country until I was 23. And I think I would say that it was transformative, especially the first 4 or 5 years, but maybe not so much in the romantic way we use the word transform. I definitely think that my experience was, in order to transform, you have to destroy, or at least I had to destroy various pieces of me and then rebuild them. And so I think the first few years were so difficult because of having to adjust. I left, I was alone in the US, and I guess the first thing that comes to mind is Pacifica culture and Asian culture. So the Philippines has two migrations, the Pacifica and Asian migrations, we're an archipelago of 7,600, so they're islands. So there's been many influences, but largely these two dominant influences make us a very collectivist society, and very much it's you are who your family is. You kind of organize yourselves, or we kind of organize ourselves around what your family does. If you're a family of doctors, it's kind of, people ask if you're not a doctor. And everybody knows who you are, right? Like, or everybody knows your business and what you do, and your life is kind of defined for you through the general history of your family, for better or for worse. And I think when I landed in the U.S., that is just so radically not the culture in the U.S., or at least not the culture in the areas of the U.S. where I was from. I've obviously later learned that the U.S. is a very big country, and you can't make random stereotypes about 300 million people. But in general, when I landed in New England, it was very much about learning about individuality. Who are you? And so the first 4 or 5 years, I had to really struggle to figure out who I was, not in the context of my family, where at home I would never needed to have introduced who I was, because that didn't matter. It doesn't matter what you think or feel, right? It's your family has a view on this, and that's that. And so it wasn't pretty, and I was too young to know to look for mentors and mentorship. And so I didn't have anybody to guide me through this. And thus made it a little bit more difficult for me and a little bit more broody during those years to get myself out of it. And I think, though, then the latter half of my time in the United States was when I really began to be comfortable in who I was becoming, and begin to explore that. And then when I came home, it was again another complete, you spent 10 years figuring out who you are, only to come home and be told, why does that even matter? I'm like, why? Who cares who you are? We know who you are. And now now it's been an additional 10 years since I've come home, 11. And I guess things are much more at peace now. I'm in the middle of I'm able to so far find peace in both sides of these on both sides of the spectrum, on both who I am as a person as well as who I am as part of my family, and I learned to, or am learning still, appreciate both for what they are, for their positives and also for the negatives, and to be conscious of the negatives and try to be sensitive and self-aware of the negatives when I hide behind just general collectivist views in the family versus when I need to stand on my own opinion, as well as to not stand on my own opinion so much that I undervalue the importance of belonging to a place and to a people and to a family, that they're not there, that while on their worst days it's suffocating, on their best days they're your source of strength, right? And then individually, while on your best days, you can do everything. On your worst days, you need to know when to ask for help. and going through life alone is maybe not something I want to. I've decided that I don't want to do that. I love being part of a community, and so yeah, I hope that answers. I mean, in some way, I hope that answers the question of just, if I were to say what I learned truly in the States, obviously apart from academics. This was probably the more important transformation. This was the truly liberating pedagogy that I learned in the U.S., which is consciousness of my own consciousness, and how to bring that back and live a life, a more engaged life because of that. Does that make sense?
It does totally.
I wonder if the experience is the same for you. I know you're calling me from Europe, so wondering if that's been something you've gone through yourself.
Ako si Nikki Baroy, isang 2017 fellow na na-assign sa Kamamanan Elementary School, Makapaya Campus sa Cagayan de Oro City. Ang favorite memory ko ay ang pagko-coach ng math competitions at ng isang environmental documentary competition sa science. Tapos para sa akin, isang malaking pribilehiyo yun dahil unang beses ng school namin na makilahok sa mga ganong tipo ng patimpalak. At yun, pinagpala kami na nanalo kami sa ng second place sa environmental competition na yun. At sana mas marami pang tao na sumali sa fellowship dahil kakaibang experience siya. At sana mas marami pang tao na magbigay ng 2 taon ng buhay nila para matulungan na ma-solve ang education inequity.
Before we go to the rest of the interview, I just wanted to let you know that the next 7 to 8 minutes, the quality of the audio on the side of Clarissa is going to be a little bit lower than the rest of the interview because there was a problem with the noise surrounding the room, and then it will go back to the regular level of this interview. So wanted to apologize for that, and I hope you still can enjoy this very inspiring interview. Yes, I had to. So basically, I grew up in a small town, in a small city, in the southwest of France. My city is called Pau, and funny enough, the most famous place close to Pau is a town called Lourdes, which is very yes. Yes. So because I saw one of your grandmom name was Lourdes. Yes.
My mother.
And I grew up there, and I always felt kind of this desire to explore and everything. And also my mom, from a young age, she's been telling us, the moment you get out of me, then you have to go and see the world, and you don't belong to me. And through you, I see the world. So I want you. That's what she told to the three of us, right? So my sister, we are three children. So there's my sister, my brother, and me, and I'm the oldest one. And she's always told us, go and see the world because through you, I see it. So from a young age, we always had that thirst to go see the world. My brother lives in Canada. I now live in the Netherlands. But before that, I've been living in 8 countries, right? So this is my ninth country. So from a very young age, I left France when I was 17, 18, first for basketball, and went to see the world. And when I came back, there was also a time where I had to adapt back. And find my grounding and okay, what is it that I take from my experience abroad? What is it that I take from my experience here? And kind of find that balance. And I would say even when I got out of Europe and went to Latin America or went to Africa, it was also, okay, when I came back to Europe, how do I find my balance back? Because there are so many things that are different in general here. But I would say that that journey definitely influenced me and also gave me, I like to have this different influence from these different cultures and also these different perspectives. And it helps in terms of understanding different perspectives. It helps in terms of, I would say, empathy. And even the work that I'm doing now, which is a lot of connected to the issues of inclusion, I would say it helps a lot. So it's kind of that journey from inside and that journey of traveling. It's very, as you say, liberating.
Well, and it forms who you are. I mean, there's a reason you're hosting podcasts, getting to know people, right? And as there's also a reason why I am deeply rooted and living in my country. And I think just the ability to pursue that, I think that's the greatest gift that my parents gave me. Maybe similar to your mom. Both my parents allowed their children, were 4 in the family. They allowed us to be who we are today. And I think maybe that, in retrospect, obviously they've given me so much, a home, a roof over our heads, and a school, and education. But the greatest, I think, most transformative gift they've given us is the freedom to choose to be who we are. And in a way, kind of like what your mom's shared, I see the world through your eyes. They asked us to define our own world. They work hard with us on our values and our values as a family, but beyond that, they don't tell us who to be, and they learn to adjust around the people who become. I speak through my lens of finding myself. It's not easy when you're parents. It's not like this entire journey was without cat fights and dog fights and lots of brooding. So it cannot be easy. So I'm just very grateful. Very grateful for the folks closest to me giving me the space to morph and transform and brood and complain and find my way home.
And now let's fast forward a little bit, and you find yourself working on, for another amazing woman as well in your research, you find yourself working for a Nobel Prize, a future Nobel Prize of Economics, and working on issues of the Philippines. And I was actually wondering, when was the shift when you went from, okay, I'm doing this research on my country, to I going to take action and make change and continue that revolutionary act of education?
Yeah, absolutely. So, when you mentioned earlier, so you're speaking of Professor Esther Duflo, and she's lovely. So my co-founder met her in the United States, and the reason I came home actually was to spearhead this project between Professor Duflo's lab and a non-profit organization, Saklat Sisikat, and they needed somebody. The survey, the impact measurement survey of the lab was going to take or be implemented across 100 public schools. About 6,000 to 8,000 public school students, 800 teachers, and the scientists were all foreigners, and this was not in Manila, so this was in actually the province next to my grandmother's, Alcalá. And so they definitely needed somebody that both knew Philippine culture but also could speak English well and obviously manage a team of data scientists that were transplanted from the United States to rural Philippines. And so I happily took this on. It started out as a 6-month engagement just to get things underway and help with working with the government officials, etc. Turned into 2 years because that's how long the survey took. And at the end of the 2 years, the results were from the Poverty Action Lab, which was co-founded by Professor Duflo, and for which she then, I guess, her whole body of work, which contributed to the lab in development economics, then is what she won the Nobel Prize for. The results of the findings on Saklat Sisikat were that the program had statistically significant positive impact on the functional literacy abilities of children in grade 4, both immediately after the intervention as well as 6 months up to 1 year later. Essentially, probably the best results that we could have ever hoped for at the times. At the time, because so many of these, end up with zero change or nothing significant, and so we were very grateful. However, I think in that journey, one thing became super apparent to the two co-founders of Saklat Sisikat. The thing that was apparent was that they were, even though by the time that we surveyed the organization, they had reached about 1 million students, and of course, as I mentioned, the survey itself was across 800 teachers, but the organization had trained about 25,000 teachers. The truth of the scale in which we were working was 27 million children. At the time, probably about 22 million, and at the time there was probably 700,000 public school teachers. Now there's 1 million. And so this is really a drop in the bucket, and I think one thing that they were very concerned about was that it really just felt like a single component intervention, meaning it was just really working at one particular level, and we could keep on doing this forever but never really catch up, right? To actually changing the system. And so that's really the genesis and the birth of what became Teach for the Philippines. We transitioned Saklat Sisikat from a single component intervention which only worked with tenured government teachers for a fixed time period of 30 days. And we also trained principals into a multi-component intervention that worked to bring in new teachers into the system, continue our work with government teachers, and then actually create a pathway for teachers to then join local and national government as technical assistants to people who were to policymakers, so that policymakers could have their decisions informed by public school teachers with experience on the ground. And so that's what we're running today. So it's very much intertwined.
Hi, I'm John Pineda, a grade 3 advisor from Malanday Elementary School. I said yes to Teach for the Philippines because I want to spend more time with the Filipino children. I believe that I can be an instrument to change the inequalities that they feel every day. Yung favorite experience ko sa Teach for the Philippines as a fellow yung everyday tuwing recess, lumalapit sa akin yung mga students ko, tapos magtatanong sila ng super cute at simpleng mga tanong, pero natatawa muna ako bago sumagot. Tulad ng, teacher, na-in love ka na ba? May pimple ka kasi sa mukha mo eh. Saka yung, Chur, mabaho ba ako? Hindi kasi ako nakaligo kahapon. Sobrang mamimiss ko talaga yung mga yun.
Wow, I really love, and that's actually in the case of of your organization. That's I'm happy because in this conversation, that's something that we can actually touch upon because this is quite unique. I don't know if I told you before, but one of my dream is actually to teach teachers because I think this is actually the highest level of impact or the highest level of teaching or of education. So I also feel so admirative and inspiring by this project and knowing that you're working with these teachers and as well that you're working somehow in a holistic way because it's not just about the teaching in the classroom and preparing them for the classroom, but you also put that political element that is so dear to you and to your history into, okay, it's not just about the classroom, is how do we prepare them to be change makers, to make change at the level of policies and governments, which is truly the essence of the critical pedagogy. And when I was reading about you and preparing this interview, I was wondering, how did you come about that vision and critical pedagogy? Because I see a lot of influence like Paulo Freire, and I don't know if you grew up upon this person or you discovered it later on. I know that Professor Duflo is big into it as well, for having watched a few of her TED Talks, and I haven't read her, but I've seen TED Talks before about her, and I love what her vision, right? Also French, by the way. But yeah, I was wondering about that, the critical pedagogy and that liberation, and yeah, I was wondering about your perspective on this and how do you come about this?
So yes, I came across the work of Paulo Freire while I was taking my master's in education, and I guess I had come across him even before that, probably high school and college, but I think I needed a professor to walk me through all of his work very patiently, and I was lucky enough to get that in my master's of education, so that I fully understood. I think I needed to, and I still do. I actually try to read Pedagogy of the Oppressed every year, just to keep digging into the various pieces of his belief. And I think, in many ways, yes, like it is related so much to the work of Teach for the Philippines. I think the thing that comes most to mind, or immediately to mind, is that traditional education is fundamentally a narrative of narrative character, and I think this is where my co-founders and I come. My co-founders are from a generation older than me, and so we come at this from different perspectives. So one thing we agree about is that traditional education is fundamentally narrative and character, and with that we mean teachers essentially in a traditional classroom narrate everything, and students memorize this narration, right? So it's a very it's a rote education system, and Freire calls this the banking model of education, and he says, or his belief, which I'm aligned with and which my co-founders are aligned with, and in fact most of the between Dewey and Freire and all the progressivists that have since emerged since that time, the agreement is that we need to move away from this banking concept and instead adopt the idea that children and people, even if you're teaching adults, are conscious beings with their own consciousness that inhabits their own bodies and that they direct toward their own view of the world. And so in his academic term, he calls it, we need to move towards problem posing education, where the role of the teacher is not to tell students what to memorize, but to help students understand who they are in relation to the community and the world around them, and to help students become conscious of their consciousness. And I think when I say that's the kind of education we train for, and the kind of education we aspire to have, that is what is the definition to me of a liberating education. It's conscious acts of cognition, and not just simply transferals of information and the ability to recite things. It's breaking, the traditional vertical patterns of banking education from teacher to student, and making it more of a dialogue. And so the way we interpret that inside Teach for the Philippines, or what we say our own jargon, is we do patient and repetitive cycles of action, reflection, and dialogue. And that philosophy, this very Freirean philosophy, influences everything we do. In fact, the program that you mentioned, which was bridging the gap between policy and practitioners by enabling or creating actually a pathway for former public school teachers to work with policymakers and sit and have a seat at the decision-making table, that came about through a process of action, reflection, and dialogue. So we had been working for 2 or 3 years already, and I was in the airport. And it was in the airport of a very small rural town in Mindanao, which is in southern Philippines. And the mayor of the town, the municipal mayor, who remains a good friend, actually drove me to this airport. And I guess for those in Europe or America, they don't have these, but maybe in your airports in Cameroon, you'd know. I mean, these are very small provincial, regional airports. It's not very. It's like like a one-room concrete room. It's nothing fancy, okay? So there's no airport security, so to speak. And so he decided that he would wait with me as I waited for the one flight out of this town for that week, right? And as we waited together and we were catching up about our teachers that were really doing incredible things for his small municipal town, his 5th-class municipality, as he proudly tells me. I asked him, I said, what's one thing that you don't think I want to hear? Tell me something that you don't think I want to hear, or tell me something that we're not doing, right? That you'd wish you'd see us, you'd see in your community, or you'd wish you'd see specifically from Teach for the Philippines. And his reply was, it's wonderful to have you as partners. You're rejuvenating the town. There's been such an influx of new energy. It's a fishing and farming community, and so he says, it's often the reverse migration, and so having new people come in here has been so exciting for everyone. However, I just feel badly because it's always focused, he said, on the kids, and he said, selfishly, I wish that there were programs that also help all the administrators in the background. And he says, I know that the principals, but also my staff in the local government and the municipal government could really use it. And how can we move forward as a community with progressive, decisions and ideas when we don't have anybody that even understands what that looks like or can help me, get there. We can't make pitches to international folks if none of us speak English. And so who's going to translate for us? Like, who's going to help us press who's going to help bring our voices up and let them be heard? And so I said, let me think about that, because one thing we do have is talent. That is kind of what the organization does. And then I thought about it on my plane, and I was mulling over it, and then later that week, in an act of absolute serendipity, I was in a meeting with this time with the Central Ministry of Education, so the Department of Education, we call it here, and it was with the Undersecretary of Program and Planning. And so he kind of runs the whole operations of schools across the entire archipelago. And funnily enough, he said the same thing. He said, I really wish that we could get, a program like yours, but instead focus on administrators. And wouldn't it be amazing if I could hear the voices from these smaller rural municipal towns? And at that point I said, well, now it's become a trend. Like, now at this point, if I've asked this question twice and 2 people have had the trust and the honesty to answer me with what they actually think, and I don't do anything about it, that's on me. And so that's how the program was actually born, Stephen. Like, it was from this process of action, reflection, and dialogue. And so we ran it. It was super successful. We've had numerous cycles of action, reflection, and dialogue. We're actually going through one now. We've had about 150 We've funneled about 150 former teachers, former teacher participants in our program into these positions, and now we're asking ourselves, okay, now we must enter into a period of reflection. Now what, right? And we've actually we're past the reflection. We're now in dialogue, right? Where we're about to close out the reflection stage, enter into dialogue, and really think about what the next steps would be. Before we again, maybe in 2021, Corona aside, take new action and move the program forward in a different way. So yeah, just to illustrate that very dialogic, philosophy can be translated. I think the beautiful thing about critical theory is it can actually also be translated to management. It's something that is not just within the four walls of the classroom, and so that's definitely something that is very much at the core of the spirit of Teach for the Philippines and the work that we do.
Hello po, ako po si Mel, teacher fellow from Cubao Elementary School. So, isa po sa memorable experience ko ay yung naging coach po ako ng robotics team na sumali sa national contest. Hindi man po kami nanalo, pero nakita ko po yung determinasyon at abilidad ng mga estudyante. At sabi nga po nila sa akin na next year, sasali ulit sila at mas gagalingan pa nila. Ang mga kwentong ganito po yung tumatatak po sa puso at isipan ko na ang pagtitiwala sa mga bata ang magbibigay ng pag-asa pa sa ating bansa.
And I also see the importance of, and that's something that actually came back with all of the other people that I've interviewed across that first season, right? Also the importance of, the humility to take that, or to create that space for the other to express that voice, to have that space of trust and of confidence, but also for you to have the humility to make something out of it and to take action, I take the ball and I will make action into it. Is it something that you are able to, that is part of the culture of Teach the Philippines? Is it something also that you are able to transfer to the teachers, the educators, the administrators that come to train?
I would like to hope so. I think teaching, so for me, I have this modeled for me by my mom and my mentor, and also all the people I look up to in this world. I think academically, I would say it's called intellectual humility, and I think the people I most admire all have it, and so they have modeled what that is for me. They're not afraid to say when they don't know, and they are constantly in pursuit of learning. And I decided long ago that was what I wanted to be as well, and those were the values I wanted to have as well. And I think, we do get this feedback from the staff that definitely the pursuit of constant learning, and the courage to also say when we don't know things is something that they appreciate about working for the organization. And so I guess in that feedback, I'm hoping that the senior leadership and actually the co-founders of Teach for the Philippines are able to model that as the kind of culture and culture of leadership that we want from all of our participants. And I'm proud when I hear former alumni or former staff very publicly admit when they don't know, reach out for help when they want to reach out for help, also gently offer help when they feel like they can help, but in a genuine and authentic way, and it makes me very proud. So yes, I think the short answer to your question is yes. I think it's very important to me personally to be conscious of doing that, because to me a core value of leadership that I would like to see in my country and this world, and something that I would like us to get to, that leaders are self-aware enough and intellectually humble enough to be open to being wrong, without having that invalidate their self-esteem.
Talking about these testimonies that you're getting from your alumni, what would be some of the last or some of the most inspiring stories that you could share with us, or one inspiring stories that would really illustrate everything? And you just share with us these stories that is beautiful. Do you have another story of alumni from your program or stories that you could share with us, and that something that really touched you?
Yeah, I have the privilege of being Filipino, and Filipinos are very affectionate, and so I have so many. I think maybe I'll just connect it back to the story that I already told you just a few minutes ago, because so a year and a half ago, I got an email from the mayor of that municipal town, and he just out of the blue wrote me, and he was happily informing me that, so you have to understand, this is a long friendship. I've known this individual for over a decade, right? And so we had just finished talking about the fact that his school in this really small town, okay, I cannot stress this enough, this town was very, very small, was selected the best literacy and education program in his region, and was endorsed to the National Literacy Council as one of the top literacy and education programs in the country. And so we had just gotten off this high, and we had been talking about this for some time. He was thrilled, and not just him was not only alone, like his school was thrilled, and the kids were so excited, and they were shining on this national stage, and so we were getting off that high, and then he sends me this other email, which I thought was going to be about the same thing, and it turned out it was about something completely different. And this one resonated with me because of the way he ended it. And he was writing me about. So I guess the context is, in this town, we have all three of our programs running in the same town. So we work with new teachers, we bring in new teachers, but we also work with tenured government teachers, and we also have given the local government support through we call it the ambassador program, but these were former participants, right? That then helped the mayor in his work. And so we had been running all three programs, which is our goal. We aim to scale the cities in which we run all three programs rather than scale any one particular program, because we go for depth rather than width. And he was saying that, it's been, at that time, let's say a year and a half ago, we had I think four successive placements of ambassadors, quote unquote, of former participants that are helping him. And he said, I just want you to know that we just finished, the budget hearings, and our municipality, this fifth-class municipality, is basically the poorest municipality of all the types of government in the Philippines, just won two of the biggest funded projects for a local government by the national government. And we're talking the tune of like 160 million pesos and up, right? And the way he ended his email was, he said, our collaboration, and I'm going to paraphrase here, but roughly it was, our collaboration here has been a beacon of hope that a remote municipality should never feel alone in this world when we try to do good things for our community. And I can pretty much recite it from memory, because it really, I was reading it in the car, and it took my breath away, but in a good way. And that stuck with me. I mean, as I mentioned, I'm lucky to have such an affectionate culture, so I folks reach out a lot, and it's such a privilege to work with all the participants and all the staff of Teach for the Philippines. If I were just in this podcast and related to that story I just told you, from this one particular relationship, I think that was the most magnificent and generous thing he's ever said to me, and it took my breath away when I heard it, and I still remember reading it, and as you can see, I pretty much memorized it.
Hi everyone. Thank you for being part of this journey. Don't forget to subscribe. I'm just getting started with this podcast, and you leaving me a review helps a lot. Make sure you join the Facebook group to continue this conversation and discover exclusive content. Subscribe to the newsletter to find out more about the episodes and the guests.
I say, oh, my baby.
Yeah. It's funny because when you will listen to, I've interviewed one friend of yours and one Obama fellow as well, Selena De Sola, last week. And at the end of the interview, we came to talk about hope as well. And it's actually so funny because I was telling her that I truly believe that teaching, educating is about engineering hope. And we discussed that. And when you talk about that message and beacon of hope, it truly means that you are reaching your vision and your mission. And the essence of teaching, yeah.
Yeah, that's what it meant to me. I mean, actually, one of the questions you had asked me before we recorded this was, what's the role of, in a similar vein, what's the role of love, right?
Yes. Thank you for taking the lead on that.
Well, because it's related, I think. One of the individuals that I look up to and had the honor of meeting, Professor Antonia Darder from the Loyola Marymount University in California, in LA. She's a Freirean scholar, and one of her books was about the pedagogy of love. And I had the privilege of listening to her lecture on it. She visited us in the Philippines. She's a wonderful soul, and somebody I really admire. And she visited us, and I had the privilege of listening to her lecture. And I think the thing I took away from it is that teaching is an act of love. As you just said, teaching enables, empowers hope, but I believe teaching is an act of love. And I think just to tie this into current events and the things that we see around our world, I think in the bigger picture, in the biggest picture of them all, love is an essential ingredient of a just society.
Yes.
It motivates us to continue to work for opportunities. Love motivates us to continue to work for opportunities for all people, not just ourselves. The act of love is a love in relation to somebody else, right? And it compels us to cultivate connection and trust and honesty, and is nurtured by the act of a relationship itself, right? And so I think because of all this, then it is central to the relationship a teacher has with his or her student. And so, again, as educators, recognizing and the recognition that teaching itself is an act of love is, I think, so important.
Because love is an act of courage, not of fear. Love is a commitment to others. No matter where the oppressed are found, the act of love is a commitment to their cause. The cause of liberation. Paulo Freire, Pedagogy of the Oppressed. Yeah, it's really a spiritual experience, it's based on, and I agree so much, and I've seen that so much, that also your intention and the way you approach it, if you approach it with love, and not just the love for the craft and the love for the other, and in a transcendent, like, bigger than you. Yes, exactly. This is full circle. Then it's not the technical part of it, it's the intention and the love that makes all the difference.
Yes, the technical part is very important, but it is the intention and the love that makes all the difference. You are absolutely correct.
Wow. So this is actually a beautiful way to end this interview. My last question would be for you. What is your favorite quote of your favorite proverb? I think you gave us one at the beginning of this interview. What is your favorite quote, your favorite proverb, and why?
Gosh, so many. I guess it depends on what mood I'm in. If I'm particular
Today, in this mood that you are talking with me right now.
Yeah, I think maybe there's one that has always stayed with me, and it's actually just to go back to full circle, as you said, to where we started this interview, and it was introduced to me through my high school. And I have to admit, at the time, I went to the school because of this, and then got very upset because I didn't feel people were living into it, and then nurtured this anger for many years until I had to transform myself to understand and mature. But regardless and nevertheless, the quote remains with me to this day. And it goes, goodness without knowledge is weak and feeble, but knowledge without goodness is dangerous. It is both united that makes one able to be most useful to humankind. And this is a paraphrase, right? But it stuck with me. And the idea that you have to be both, to have both goodness and knowledge to be of use to humankind, stuck with me. So again, just exactly as you yourself said a few minutes ago, I mean, the technical aspect of it is absolutely critical, but the intention and the love is what makes all the difference.
Well, let me tell you, Clarissa Isabelle Delgado, that you are making a difference with love, with the technical aspect, touching lives. And I'm actually very honored and very happy to have had this conversation with you. I also want to thank you for being one of the first one to answer positively, with no real just opening the door and helping me a lot to prepare this interview. It's been really a beautiful experience, a beautiful journey for me. So I wanted to tell you how grateful I am and to thank you for that, and also to thank you in the name of our audience for sharing so much knowledge. I really believe that this is actually our first conversation. I would love, because there's so many other things that we can discuss. So I'm sure this is our first conversation. So yes, thank you.
The gratitude is shared. It's been wonderful getting to know you in the process, Stephen, and to know of your family, because I know just from our short communication, just how much of their lives have influenced yours. So it's a privilege and to know this, and thank you. And I'm just excited for you as you pursue a teaching career.
Yes, thank you.